Pig and Pepper. For a minute or two she stood looking at the house and wondering what to do next. Then suddenly a footman in livery, he looked exactly like a fish, ran out of the wood and knocked loudly at the door. Another footman in livery, with a round face and large eyes like a frog, opened it. She felt very curious to know what it was all about, and came a little way out of the wood to listen. The fish footman took from under his arm a great letter, nearly as large as himself, and handed it over to the other, saying, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog footman repeated, changing the order of the words a little. "From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." Then they both bowed low, and their curls got entangled together. Alice laughed so much at this that she had to run back into the wood, for fear of their hearing her. And when she came back, there was only a frog footman sitting on the ground near the door, staring stupidly up into the sky. Alice went timidly up to the door, and knocked. "There's no use in knocking," said the footman. "And that for two reasons. Firstly, because I'm on the same side of the door as you are. Secondly, because they're making such a noise inside that no one could possibly hear you." And certainly there was a horrible noise going on within, a constant howling and sneezing, and every now and then a great crash. "Please then," said Alice, "how can I get in?" "I shall sit here," the footman remarked, "till tomorrow." At this moment the door of the house opened, and a large plate flew out, straight at the footman's head. It just scratched his nose, and broke to pieces against one of the trees behind him. "Or the next day, maybe," the footman continued in the same tone. It seemed he didn't notice the plate. "How can I get in?" Alice asked again, a little louder. "Do you have any reason to get in at all?" said the footman. "That's the first question, you know." It was, no doubt. But Alice didn't like the remark. "It's really awful," she muttered to herself. "The way all these creatures argue. It's enough to drive one crazy." The footman seemed to think this a good opportunity for repeating his remark. "I shall sit here," he said, "for days and days." "Oh, there's no use in talking to him," said Alice. "He's perfectly idiotic." And she opened the door and went in. The door led right into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke from one end to the other. The Duchess was sitting on a chair in the middle, nursing a baby. The cook was stirring a large pot which seemed to be full of soup. "There's certainly too much pepper in that soup," Alice said to herself, sneezing. There was certainly too much of it in the air. Even the Duchess sometimes sneezed. And as for the baby, it kept sneezing and howling without a moment's pause. The only creatures in the kitchen that did not sneeze were the cook and the large cat, which was sitting by the fireplace and grinning from ear to ear. "May I ask you a question?" said Alice, a little timidly. "Why is your cat grinning like that?" "It's a Cheshire cat," said the Duchess, "and that's why." "Pig." She said the last word with such sudden anger that Alice quite jumped. But she saw in another moment that the Duchess was addressing the baby, not her. So she took courage, and went on again. "I didn't know that Cheshire cats always grinned." To tell the truth, I didn't know that cats could grin. They all can, said the Duchess, and most of them do. I didn't know that, Alice said very politely, feeling quite happy to have a conversation. You don't know much, said the Duchess. And that's a fact. Alice did not like the tone of this remark. She decided to introduce some other subject of conversation. While she was trying to think of one, the cook took the soup off the fire and at once started throwing everything she could reach at the Duchess and the baby. Pots, plates, and dishes. The Duchess took no notice of them even when they hit her. And the baby was howling so much already that Alice wasn't sure about his reaction. "Oh, please stop it!" cried Alice, jumping up and down in her terror. "Oh, mind his little nose!" as an unusually large pot flew close by it. "Everybody must mind one's own business," the Duchess growled. "It would make the world go round a deal faster than it does." "Which would not be an advantage," said Alice, very glad to get an opportunity of showing off a little of her knowledge. "Just think of what work it would make with the day and night. It takes the Earth 24 hours to turn round on its axis." "Talking of axes," said the Duchess, "off with her head." Alice looked anxiously at the cook, but the cook was busily stirring the soup and seemed not to be listening. So she went on again. 24 hours, I think, or is it 12? Oh, stop it," said the Duchess. "I hate figures." And she began nursing her child again, singing a sort of lullaby to it as she did so, and shaking it at the end of every line. "Speak roughly to your little boy, and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy, because he knows it teases." While singing, the Duchess kept tossing the baby violently up and down, and the poor child howled so that Alice could hardly hear the words. "I speak severely to my boy. I beat him when he sneezes, because I know he can enjoy the pepper when he pleases." "Well, you may nurse it a bit," the Duchess said to Alice, throwing the baby to her as she spoke. "I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen." And she hurried out of the room. The cook threw a frying pan after her as she went out, but it just missed her. Alice caught the baby with some difficulty, because it held out its arms and legs in all directions. Just like a starfish, thought Alice. The poor child was snorting terribly when she caught it, and kept doubling itself up and straightening itself out again, so that for the first minute or two she could only hold it. Finally she managed to twist it up into a sort of knot, and carried it out into the open air. "I must take this child away with me," thought Alice. She said the last words out loud, and the baby answered by a grunt. "Don't grunt," said Alice. "That's not at all a proper way of expressing yourself." The baby grunted again, and Alice looked very anxiously into its face to see what was the matter with it. There could be no doubt that it had a very turned-up, pig-like nose, and its eyes were extremely small for a baby. Altogether Alice did not like the look of the baby at all. But perhaps it was only sobbing, she thought, and looked into its eyes again. But there were no tears. "Don't you turn into a pig, my dear," said Alice gravely, "or I'll have nothing to do with you." The poor creature sobbed again, or grunted, it was impossible to say which, and they went on for some time in silence. Alice was just beginning to think to herself, "Well, what shall I do with this creature at home?" when it grunted again, so violently that she looked down into its face quite anxiously. This time there could be no mistake about it. It was really a pig, and it would be quite absurd to carry it further. So she put the little creature down, and was happy to see it trot away quietly into the wood. It could grow into quite an ugly child, she thought, but now it is a handsome pig. And she began thinking over the way of turning some other children she knew into pigs, when she was a little startled by seeing the Cheshire cat sitting on a branch of a tree a few yards off. The cat only grinned when it saw Alice. It looked good-natured, she thought, but it had very long claws and a great many teeth, so she decided to treat it with respect. "Would you tell me, please, which way shall I go from here?" she asked. "That depends on where you want to get to," said the cat. "I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," said the cat. "So long as I get somewhere," Alice added as an explanation. "Oh, you're sure to do that," said the cat. "Just keep walking." Alice tried another question. "What sort of people live here?" "In that direction," the cat said, waving its right paw round, "lives a hatter. And in that direction," waving the other paw, "lives a March hare. Visit any of them, they're both mad." "But I don't want to meet mad people," Alice said. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" said Alice. "Of course you are," said the cat. "That's why you're here." Alice, "I didn't think that proved it at all." "And how do you know that you're mad?" she went on. "To begin with," said the cat, "a dog's not mad. Is it right?" "I think so," said Alice. "Well, then," the cat went on, "you see, a dog growls when it's angry, and wags its tail when it's happy. And I growl when I'm happy, and wag my tail when I'm angry. It proves that I'm mad." "I call it purring, not growling," said Alice. "Call it what you like," said the cat. "Do you play croquet with the Queen today?" "Unfortunately, she didn't invite me," said Alice. "You'll see me there," said the cat, and disappeared. It didn't really surprise Alice. After all the out-of-the-way things of the day, she was still looking at the tree when the cat suddenly appeared again. "And what happened with the baby?" said the cat. "It turned into a pig," Alice quietly said. She made no comment on the cat's sudden appearance. "I knew that," said the cat, and disappeared again. Alice waited a little, expecting to see it again, but it did not appear. And after a minute or two she walked on in the direction in which the March hare lived. "I see hatters quite often," she said to herself. "The March hare will be much more interesting. And this is May, so maybe it won't be completely mad. At least not as mad as it was in March." As she said this, she looked up, and there was the cat again, sitting on a branch of a tree. "Did you say pig, or fig?" said the cat. I said pig, answered Alice. And could you stop appearing and disappearing so suddenly, please? You make me quite giddy. All right, said the cat. And this time it disappeared quite slowly, beginning with the end of the tail, and ending with the grin. The grin was the last thing to disappear. Well, a cat without a grin is quite an ordinary thing, thought Alice. But a grin without a cat. It's the most curious thing I ever saw in my life. Soon she saw the house of the March Hare. She knew it at once because the chimneys looked like his. The house was so large that Alice bit another piece of the left-hand mushroom and raised herself to about 2 feet high. Only then she dared to go further, walking timidly and saying to herself, "He may be mad, after all. Oh, why didn't I choose the Hatter instead?"
Вам нравится учить английский с нами? Тогда подпишитесь на наш канал, чтобы не пропустить новое видео. И не забудьте поставить лайк. До новых встреч!